Bringing in the rest of you guys, Stephen Miller was tweeting or posting or whatever people are doing these days, saying only federal officers are upholding the law. Local and state police have been ordered to stand down and surrender. I want to parse this because of this conversation about the Insurrection Act. What's your interpretation of him saying that that local and state police have been ordered to stand down?
Well, I think what's happening in Minneapolis right now, we know that if there is an increase in law enforcement, federal law enforcement, it'll only ramp things up. And I think local law enforcement is not, they don't understand how to enforce immigration law. And so I think it is one of these situations where if we do increase a law enforcement presence on the ground, it will only end up causing even more chaos. And what I find interesting about all of this and in the earlier reporting is that they are sort of out there selectively enforcing the law. They're out there, they're investigating the protesters, they're investigating Renee Good, but they're not necessarily investigating the officer who conducted the shooting, which is clear. He's in clear violation of DOJ policy as well as ICE policy and potentially federal law.
So the conversation right now is a public that is dissatisfied with how with ICE tactics, air quotes. But the longer protests happen, that people will have strong feelings about, does that affect this conversation? I don't know. You were watching the video very closely in the church.
So a couple different things. First of all, on the Stephen Miller thing, I've read the Constitution a couple times. Nowhere in there does it say that the White House Deputy Chief of Staff can order local law enforcement in a sovereign state to do, I almost cursed, anything. And it's all not, like maybe I missed some reporting that there has been some order or request made from federal authorities.
I think what they're generally saying, they're often arguing that local officials aren't cooperating.
No, I get that they're not cooperating, but like, the president, never mind the deputy White House Chief of Staff, doesn't get to tell local law enforcement officers to lay down their weapons and surrender. I don't know what the hell that means. On this, look, I have contempt for a lot of people in this whole thing. I think it is just incredibly selfish, myopic, and ill-advised to storm a church for this kind of protest. It doesn't help the situation at all. And what we have is basically what they call in economists a Baptist and bootleggers situation, where the most extreme people on the left have an interest in heightening tensions, and the most extreme people in the White House have an interest in heightening tension.
Can I add to what you're saying? The bishop of New Hampshire, I think he's an Episcopal bishop, had been warning his clergy. He said, I've asked them to get their affairs in order, to make sure they have their wills written, because it may be that now is no longer the time for statements, but for us with our bodies to stand between the powers of this world. I think what he's saying, the church is not going to be on the sidelines, that the gap between the bootleggers and the Baptists, as you said, is gonna close as you have more and more people speaking up.
Yes, I don't normally quote Yeats here, but the center's not holding, right? Most Americans, they don't like this chaos. They don't like people interfering with law enforcement, and they don't like law enforcement behaving like thugs. But there are these people who want to heighten the contradictions and make it so that you have to choose sides on one side or the other. It's not good for the country. It's not even good for these immigrants. It's not good for Minneapolis.
Yeah.
It puts a lot of people in danger.
And the question that comes, what is the responsibility of the federal government, right? When you have activists all over the place who are trying to heighten tensions, the people who are supposed to be looking out for what's good for the country are the people in the White House, the President of the United States, Deputy Chief of Staff, all those people. And it is a question of whether how they are interpreting what that means, right? Whether doing what's best for the country, for them, seems to be to continue to exacerbate the situation rather than to try to diffuse it.
Randy, can I just bring you in for a second? I feel like there have been mass protest movements and civil disobedience in this country cyclically, and occasionally the federal government is called in. And troops are called in, right? We saw that in the civil rights period to protect desegregation efforts. But are we walking in that direction now, or are we running?
Actually, it's not anything like what has been done before, whenever both Eisenhower as well as JFK called in troops into the South to enforce civil rights laws, federal civil rights laws. That was done to protect the rights of individuals. This particular incursion is the reverse of that. It's to actually infringe upon the personal liberties of those people in Minneapolis. And of course, it's not about de-escalating, it's about escalating the tensions. It also makes me wonder, as a military retired general officer, why are we using an Arctic trained and equipped brigade to go into Minneapolis? Who is the president listening to? We only have 2 brigades of those kind of forces. I tell you what, it also makes me wonder, are they preparing for something else? For example, to potentially reinforce U.S. bases in Greenland. Because we could take any forces in the United States to potentially use in Minneapolis. And of course, that begs the question, why do it at all? But we already know the answer to that, is that this particular administration does not want to see any kind of demonstrations against him. And so this is a very difficult and very dangerous situation where we might have federal troops on one side saying U.S. Army, and on the other side of the line, National Guard troops, their brothers and sisters whose uniforms also say U.S. Army on them. And this is unprecedented. It's unnecessary. And again, it is not in any way supporting the governor or the mayor there in Minneapolis. This is absolutely a misuse of military resources.
Doug, can I bring you in here? Because I feel like going into midterms, you're going to have Republicans that are going to be out talking about this moment. And there is definitely a world where they describe it as the anarchy, the street protests, like the kind of the way they did after 2020.
Sure, but this isn't what Republicans want to be talking about. They see the same polls that everybody else does, that the country, by and large, does not like this. Some on the right are happy to see, federal officers there enforcing law, however they may see in Minneapolis. Obviously, those on the left feel differently. But that center is saying over and over again, please talk about and address what's important to us. And that is overwhelmingly jobs, the economy, and prices. CBS had a poll this morning that came out. 74% of independent voters said this administration is spending too little time focused on the economy. That means they're not focused on, or at least appear not to be focused on, what voters are saying very loudly. Please focus on what we deal with every day.
And the question is, when you have people, even if they are extreme hardliners on immigration and want massive deportations, many of them are responding to this and saying, well, we still don't want to see people get shot or pulled out of their cars. And those scenes are clearly troubling a lot of Americans wherever they are on the political spectrum.
Yeah, and the reality is Trump also could take a huge victory lap and say, we're not even talking about securing the border anymore because the border is secure. That's a conversation that we've really stopped.
Has anyone heard a single metric for when this is over? I think Kristi Noem was asked this weekend that question.
No, but I also think that they claim and they believe that this is a good thing for them. I think going into the midterm elections, while the center might think that they don't want to be talking about that, they want to talk about costs. I do think that the president would like to be in Democratic cities and show that, it is Democrats where there is large amounts of crime and where immigration is a problem, et cetera. But the problem is that Donald Trump is in charge. This is his problem as well.
Just to play devil's advocate here, I do not underestimate the capacity of a Democrat to step on a rake, sort of like messaging-wise. And
storming a church is a good way to do that.
Well, look at Minneapolis.
It's not just that. It's what do you say to the people who are storming the church? How do you fill in the gap between what is the issue that people are frustrated on and the issue of which you could step in and be the solution if you don't have solutions? I'm not judging here, but I do want to hear from you guys if you see anybody stepping into that gap and finding a way. Right now, we're hearing, Minnesota lawmakers are sort of politically vulnerable because of this scandal in the Somali community. So who helps? Who steps in?
Yeah, and I think that part of where you see Democrats stepping in it a little bit is when they're talking about abolishing ICE. That is a conversation
that went really well last time.
That's a conversation that I don't think anybody should be having. They should have talks about how maybe to reform ICE. I think ICE should potentially not be under DHS anymore. I think it should be under DOJ. But I mean, I think there are some reforms you can make without calling for abolishing ICE. You can also be, for reducing violent crime and not in some of these states where they're saying violent crime is fine.
I also think there's a messaging. I don't normally give a lot of advice to Democrats or Republicans these days, but there's messaging that simply says, the way they're doing this is putting ICE agents in danger.
Yeah.
Like, this is not how, if you actually want to do a surge into a place, you don't announce it beforehand and turn it into this Spanish Civil War kind of thing.
Okay, hold on one second, you guys. We're going to talk